You're listening to In Network, Nordic's podcast series where we explore healthcare and technology with experts from around the globe.
Hello, and welcome to the In Network podcast feature Designing for Health. I'm Nordic's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Craig Joseph. In this episode, I speak with journalist and NYU Stern adjunct professor Marina Gerner about her provocative and award-winning book, The Vagina Business. We explore the Femtech movement, where innovation meets stigma, and why healthcare system leaders should care. From smart bras that monitor heart health to birth injury prevention devices and smart nipple shields, Marina highlights how tech designed for female bodies is often dismissed as niche, despite addressing massive unmet needs. We also unpack the cultural and financial barriers to investment, the normalization of female pain, and the difference between Femtech and Scamtech. If you think this is just about vaginas, you're missing the trillion-dollar opportunity. Let's plug in. Marina Gerner, welcome to the podcast. Where do we find you today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sitting on my chair in London, in the UK.
We are talking today because someone connected us about your book. And so you put out a book recently, The Vagina Business.
That's right. And the subtitle is The Innovative Breakthroughs That Could Change Everything in Women's Health.
So give us the backstory. Why don't you kind of give us a little introduction as to how you got to where you are and how you got to write a book that's called The Vagina Business.
My background is that I'm a journalist, and I also have a side hustle as an adjunct professor at the NYU Stern School of Business. And I've always been interested in the stories of women, whether that's in, technology or health or business. So that's been my focus for a while. And then a few years ago, I learned that if you ask most people to imagine a person who's having a heart attack, most people tend to picture an old white man. And the symptoms they think of is pressure on the chest and then pain radiating down the left-hand side. And I learned that those symptoms are typical for men, but they're not typical for women. And I thought that was so shocking, and as a result of that, women are 50% more likely to be misdiagnosed after having a heart attack. We also wait longer to seek help. Our symptoms are considered atypical. They're more likely to include things like jaw pain and long-term fatigue, for instance. And women also experience that pain and the pressure on the chest, but we're more likely to describe it as discomfort. And so I learned there was this issue, and I also met the founder of a company called Tech, and the founder is called Alicia Chong Rodriguez. And what her company has created is what I thought is the coolest thing. It's a smart bra that can help women who are at risk monitor their heart health. And I thought this is wonderful. Not only is there this huge problem, but there are also people who are creating new things that might be part of the solution and that might help us fill that particular gender data gap. And I approached her about an interview. I messaged all of my editors about this story of the smart bra. And then I kept looking at my inbox and there was just tumbleweed. Nobody was interested. And there was this, it was really surprising because I've written for lots of different places, been a journalist for 15 years. And there was the sense that the topic was a bit niche. That made me wonder, how can something that could potentially help over 50% of the population, how can that be considered niche? And then I held on to this story, even though I didn't manage to place it. The story stayed with me, which doesn't happen with many other stories in journalism, But this story stayed with me. And then the pandemic happened. And I think that changed a few things because power dynamic shifted between the doctor's office and the patient's home because we trusted people to test themselves for COVID. And also, initially, when you think back to the start of COVID, men had worse symptoms than women. So if you wanted to be cynical, you could say we started to pay attention to sex differences in health because men were more affected by COVID. And that's when I finally managed to place the story about the smart bra. It came out in The Guardian. It did really well. And I was invited as a result of that to chair a panel at one of the first ever conferences focused on Femtech, which is female technology. So that's technology focused on female bodies. And I was completely blown away by this conference. I was drawn into this space. I was in my early 30s at the time. I'm in my mid 30s now, and I have a child now. But at the time, I knew that I wanted to have children soon. So I was preparing for this. And I knew that the vast majority of first-time mothers experience birth injuries. unfortunately. So I wanted to prevent that, and I was looking for solutions. And I found a company in California called Materna Medical that's creating a preventative device for birth injuries. And I thought that was so fascinating. I spoke to the CEO, Tracy McNeil, and she told me that the last big innovation in the standard of care of birth was the epidural, which was popularized in the 1950s. And that just blew my mind, because I was thinking there's no other area of society or technology where we bring something out from the 1950s and we say to people, hey, look, this is the best we got. Look at this cutting edge floppy disk over here. But in birth, that's exactly what we do. And I thought that was shocking. And the more I looked into the space of what I describe as vagina-centric innovation, the more I realized that one of the biggest, or perhaps the biggest obstacle, is that most investors are male, and they don't want to invest in these companies because there's so much stigma around these topics. And I have a quote from one investor who says in the book, I don't want to talk about vaginas in my Monday morning partner meeting. And that's the kind of attitude that stands in the way of innovation focused on female bodies. And that just made me so angry.
Yeah.
So I wrote an article called We Need to Talk About Investors' Problem with Vaginas. And that went viral, came out in Wired magazine. And then I took this as what they call a proof of concept in the business world, to then write a book and look at this movement and, tell the story of the Femtech movement.
So I love everything about that. What I wonder about is, what is the right response to that partner who said, I don't want to talk about vaginas at my Monday morning partners meeting. It would seem to me, in hindsight, the best response is, would you like to talk about money?
Yes. Would you like to talk about the unmet need? Would you like to talk about the total addressable market? Would you like to talk about why this matters? And, if you don't want to talk about vaginas, maybe all the others also don't want to talk about vaginas. So wouldn't you have an advantage if you were the odd one out?
Yeah, that makes sense. Is that message being received now because of some of these conversations and because of some of the female founders that you're referencing?
I sure hope so. I mean, my goal with the book is to change that conversation and to normalize that conversation. And that's why it was so important for me to have the word vagina on the cover, because I could have called this book lots of other things. And I actually, faced lots of obstacles with that particular title. And I had to come up with 16 alternative titles at one point. All of those titles were tested on our target audience in A/B testing by my publisher, and then the Vagina Business won. So ultimately, this title won in the market research, but there's been a lot of resistance to it. But the point of the book is to destigmatize the conversation. So I figured if I put the word vagina right next to the word business, and the book can sometimes be found in the business section, sometimes it's in the social sciences section. It depends on the bookstore, but it stands out wherever it is.
I love it. And did you get pushback from someone other than the publisher?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So the publisher also had feedback from independent bookstores who said that they wouldn't display it and they wouldn't promote it. I had pushback from when I was reaching out to other authors to write endorsements for the book. One author said to me the title is too much for her, so she wouldn't write me a blurb. I had a venue turn me down when I wanted to have a book launch there, just purely based on the title. Some people who've written reviews for the book on Amazon have used the word vagina in the review, and then that was flagged as violating community guidelines. So they've sent me screenshots of their reviews being censored. And I think there's a lot of censorship that happens behind the scenes where people wouldn't necessarily tell me, nah, like your book title is too much for us, but they simply don't reply.
Wow. So I'm just honestly shocked.
Yeah, no, this book was published a few months ago and it continues to be an obstacle. So the book has already won 2 awards, which is amazing. And one of them was supposed to be announced in Dubai. So that didn't happen because they couldn't have mentioned the title on the stage of this big conference. And, there continues to be pushback. It keeps happening. And it is shocking, but it's not too surprising because all of the founders I've interviewed in the space, whether that's menopause related, UTI focused, sex education. All these companies and nonprofits experience censorship online, all of them.
Wow. I'm at a loss for words, and that's not typical for me. So
I can believe that.
yeah, it's just I get it in certain areas of the world, maybe, but boy, widespread.
Yeah, including for things like lactation cookies. Really things where, you just wouldn't expect it.
You said that you were a professor at Stern as well. How did that come about?
So I have these. Some people call it multi-hyphenate or portfolio career. I have these 2 tracks in my career. I've been a journalist from the age of 19, I think, is when I published my first article in a big newspaper, and I also did a PhD in my early 20s, and so I just continued doing those 2 things at the same time. I left academia for about 5 years to be in journalism full time as a staff writer. I returned to academia with this. It's an adjunct professor role, so it's part-time. Yeah, it's wonderful. I teach a course called Commerce and Culture, which is very unusual because it combines, business and society, business and culture, and it's also what I'm doing with the book and I think women's health innovation is the perfect case study for that, because if you only looked at it from a business perspective, you'd think, hang on, this is a $1 trillion market opportunity. Yeah. And you wouldn't understand the stigma and the cultural side of things. If you only looked at it from the cultural side of things, you wouldn't understand the financial underpinning of everything. So I think with a topic like that, my very idiosyncratic choice of subjects has come together in a way that's really helpful.
Some of the female founders that you talked about in the Femtech area, they all seem to be female.
Not all of them.
I was going to say, tell me about that.
About 80% are estimated to be female, but then there's a fair amount of both founders and researchers and investors who are men. And I've included plenty of them in the book as well, because I think everybody needs to be on board with this subject. And it's an opportunity for everyone, really. Where it gets a bit complicated is when you look at the data on how much money different teams raise. And unfortunately, most money, even in the femtech space, is raised by all male teams. And that's where it becomes a structural issue, because there's a company over here called Flow Health, which is a period tracker, and they've become the first European femtech unicorn. And they were founded by a group of men. And so when they became a unicorn, people were asking, what do you make of it? Is it a problem that it was set up by guys, or is it a victory for all of us because they've raised all this money and they've achieved this unicorn status? And it's complicated in and of itself. As a case study or as a one-off example, it is a good thing for the femtech industry to have such an example of success. But if you look at the structural side of things and you realize, well, if it was led by a group of women, they wouldn't have raised that money. And so that's where it becomes difficult.
Tell me about, we like to talk about design. That's part of the podcast, designing in healthcare. And so femtech design, are there any kind of overarching concepts that people just generally get wrong when designing for femtech, from not just the product itself necessarily, but maybe the conceptualizing of it and marketing of it and financing of it? Are there design flaws that you've seen that are common?
Yes. Let me just pull up a certain chapter in my book. What I do is I distinguish between femtech and scamtech. And so femtech is technology focused on female bodies, everything from periods to menopause, but also going beyond, like cardiovascular health and bone health. And then you have scamtech, which is technology that monetizes our insecurities and that, missells things. And so that's where we get to the insidious side of things. So, for instance, vagina steaming devices, are a harmful device, and those still exist. They're not banned, but we know that they can lead to all sorts of damage There's also a range of intimate wash products that are potentially quite harmful. And then I've also found that there's a new version of the pink tax in healthcare. So, when we think of the pink tax, traditionally we would think of razors. And so pink razors that are marketed to women are more expensive than blue razors that are sold to men. And in healthcare, we have generic drugs like ibuprofen being repackaged, put into pink packaging, and they're being called Feminax or Midol, and those are then sold at a premium for period pain relief. So those are three categories, kind of the actively damaging, the useless / potentially damaging, and a new version of the pink tax. And so the questions I recommend asking are, does this product monetize shame in any way? So does it imply that your body is dirty? Does it sell beauty is pain? That old idea. Does it provide a false sense of safety? Is it underregulated for what it is? What data does it collect? What claims does it make? What's the evidence? And what emotions does it trigger? Because in the fertility space, we see a lot of messaging that sounds like you're running out of eggs. Quick, you're running out of eggs. You're almost 35. Your fertility is about to fall off a cliff. And so whenever you have something that triggers your emotions so strongly, it's kind of worth pausing and asking, what am I being sold here?
I'd say I've never heard of the pink tax, but it resonates.
Yeah, it applies. So I usually use the example of razors, but you could also look at haircuts. Haircuts for women are so much more expensive, or rain jacket, all sorts of things. Once you start looking into them, you'll see the pink tax in them.
That is fascinating. How do you draw attention? You've said some of the media, of which you are somewhat a part, the media is not helping, right? Sometimes, even in trying to advertise or market your book.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we get folks in the media to be more comfortable, or is it just part of the overall culture of the area that they live in?
I think it's about shifting the conversation, and not just by making people more comfortable with certain terms, but also by just using certain terms without using euphemisms, for example. Because, if people don't want to use vagina at a doctor's office, and there are some surveys that show that, I don't remember the exact percentage, but a really large percentage of young women don't want to use the word vagina at the doctor's office. And that has really terrible consequences further down the line. How do we get people to use those words? And how do we get people to use words like perimenopause or endometriosis? And I think, because if you don't know that something might happen to you or your friends or your family members, how are you supposed to address it? And there are still lots of people who think, okay, menopause is when your period stops one day. And they're not really aware of perimenopause and the various symptoms, the 34 odd symptoms that can come with that. And the same goes for endometriosis. 10% of women are estimated to have endometriosis. But historically, we've normalized female pain, right? So women were always told, oh, you've got period pain, extreme period pain. Well, that's normal. When in reality, there could be an underlying issue there, like endometriosis.
You're going back to your first example of heart attacks with women too. This has real world implications of, even if the signs of a certain disease are slightly different, it's on the healthcare side of being able to think about some of these things. And yeah, you're right. The average female who's having a heart attack doesn't have the same symptoms as the average man. And yet we only assume most of us assume all heart attacks are, chest pain, feels like an elephant standing on my chest, that sort of thing. And that shows in the morbidity and mortality results of cardiac problems in women. Let me pivot a little to the concept of femtech. That term, some folks have a problem with that in saying that, well, why is it femtech? Isn't it just tech?
Yeah.
How is femtech? Why does it need its own category?
I have lots of thoughts on this. I think the first funny thing is with the term femtech is whenever you use it, people hear fintech, financial technology. So, oftentimes people think you talk about online banking when obviously that's not what we're talking about here. The term was coined by Ida Tin, the founder of Clue, in 2016 to bring together all these different kinds of companies that are innovating in women's health. And so, what's special about it is that 80% of founders are female, and it's estimated to be a $1 trillion market opportunity. Obviously, I hope that femtech will only be called tech one day, just like health tech will simply be health, right? Because tech will be a normal component of healthcare. And I think with femtech, some people prefer to use the term women's health innovation, but I think the success of the movement does not really depend on what term we use exactly. And I think the term might evolve in future as well. But right now, it's really helpful because people find each other by using that term as a hashtag on LinkedIn, on Instagram. There are conferences that are organized that are specifically called Femtech conferences, Femtech webinars, Femtech accelerators. So it's a term that has energized people and that has brought people together. And I think for that, it's really helpful. And a parallel example is, feminism. You could say, well, isn't it simply equality or human rights? But we still have feminism for a certain reason. And hopefully we won't need feminism one day. In the same way, I would say, hopefully we won't need the term femtech one day. It will all be tech because tech will serve us all equally.
So are there any good examples or particularly interesting founders or companies that you've encountered in the writing of the book that you think deserve highlighting?
Absolutely. I could give you so many examples. It really depends on what part of women's health you're interested in. But there's, for instance, in Copenhagen, there's a new form of contraception that's being developed called We. And it looks like a laundry capsule. It's transparent. And so it's something you dissolve in the vagina and it works together with the cervical mucus to keep sperm out. So it's a non-hormonal form of contraception. And I think in the future, we will have more non-hormonal choices. There's also Contraline, which is a long-term contraceptive for men. It's a reversible vasectomy that uses a hydrogel, and that's being developed at the moment. So I think there's a lot that will happen in the non-hormonal contraceptive space. Then there's also a device that's just come to the market in Ireland, which is a smart nipple shield. So, nipple shields are usually, they're used when you're breastfeeding to either help with the latch of the baby or to protect the nipple. And historically, they've been made out of lots of different materials like glass and pewter and plants even, I think. And this one is different because it has a sensor in it that can measure the amount of milk a baby is getting. And that could potentially be really helpful if you have babies with a low birth weight or, if you have mothers who would like to breastfeed, but they're too worried about how much milk the baby is getting. You can also then use that information for research purposes. And that's the case with a lot of femtech companies, is that they collect so much data we've never had before that if you partner with researchers, you can get some incredible insights into how somebody's milk supply correlates with other aspects of their health.
That's amazing. As a pediatrician, all we could do was measure the number of minutes the baby was nursing and then the output, right? You could never really know what the baby was getting. So that would be incredibly helpful, especially for kids who are somewhat sick and we really need to know about their fluid intake.
Yeah. So that one's called the Coro, that device. Yeah.
That's awesome. So those are just a few of the kind of examples that are
Yeah, I've interviewed over 100 people in the book, so you'll find many, many, many more examples there. And I've interviewed people across 15 different countries because I wanted to show people the range of innovation there is.
If you could wave a magic wand and change just one thing about women's healthcare, how it's designed, how it's delivered, what would that be?
Oh yes, I think there's something really universal, which is the normalization of female pain. I think if we reverse that, that would be a huge and revolutionary thing to do, because right now we still say to women, extreme period pain, oh, that's normal. Pain with breastfeeding, that's normal. Oh, you're giving birth. Well, there's no birth without pain. IUD insertion, well, you can't possibly expect pain relief, although that's slowly changing. But I think if we completely reversed that attitude across the world, that would be revolutionary.
Is there any specific advice that you'd give to aspiring entrepreneurs who are looking to break into Femtech? What can they learn besides reading the book for sure? What can they learn to either avoid or make sure that they do?
Well, of course, I was also going to say read the book. All of my wisdom, all of my treasures are contained in the book. And, I'm giving them to the world. I think it's really important to, if you're not a researcher, if you're not a medical professional, to assemble a team that, includes medical professionals, that includes researchers, and to make sure that whatever you're doing is evidence-based. I think we see a lot of snake oil, unfortunately, a lot of things that are not evidence-based, especially in the area of supplements or apps or, things that aren't regulated to a high standard always. Make sure that what you're doing addresses an actual problem. Because I see companies that are addressing issues that aren't actually issues as well. So I've seen apps that will analyze your menstrual cycle and tell you if you're supposed to have a meeting or if you're particularly creative on that day. And that's just reductive, and it's just unhelpful. It's not constructive. So make sure that you're addressing an actual problem, that you find a solid unmet need. Make sure that there's a business model for your venture, that it can exist in a commercial frame, because not everything can exist in a commercial frame, even if it's a good idea, even if it addresses an unmet need. Put together a good team and think about how it will get funded. And, venture capital is not right for every company. And in fact, I think we need many, many other sources of funding in women's health.
Excellent. Well, we always like to end with the same question, and of all of the folks that we interview, and the question is this: if is there something in your life that is so well designed that it brings you joy whenever you interact with it?
I would say my hands-free and smart breast pump. So I have a baby, I'm breastfeeding, and I also launched a book at the end of last year. So I've had speaking engagements all over the world, and I always travel for the shortest possible amount of time, a day and a half, maybe 2 days and one night. And I'm traveling with this breast pump that is quite small, that I've used on the plane, that you simply pop into your bra, and it doesn't have any wires that are, attached to anything. It's relatively quiet, it's convenient. And on these trips, I always find myself thinking, wow, I'm so dependent on this device because, without it, I would risk having a clogged milk duct. I could risk having mastitis. I could risk my milk supply going down and so on. But with this device, I've got the freedom to be away for a day or so. I used a breast pump on the plane, and I asked the flight attendants on the way back from San Francisco, I said to them, have you ever seen anyone else using a breast pump on the plane? And they said to me, oh yeah, actually, there was a woman there on Friday who used a breast pump. And I said, yeah, that was me, because I was flying on the same schedule as the flight attendants. So it's still quite rare, I guess. And there are certain suggestions I have on how they could improve that design, but I think compared to older breast pumps, it's a much more convenient tool right now.
That's amazing. Dr. Marina Gerner, thank you so much for educating us about Femtech, and would encourage everyone to check out your book, The Vagina Business, and to prominently display it in their front window.
Yes, that would be great. And please post about it on LinkedIn or on Instagram, and feel free to tag me and I will reshare your posts.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. Really appreciated the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more on Marina, follow her on LinkedIn and check out her book, The Vagina Business. Check back for more episodes of Designing for Health wherever you listen to podcasts or on NordicGlobal.com. Till next time, we'll see you in network. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. This helps others find the podcast as well.